You're fired. I want a divorce. Get out of my company.
Fire every one of them, starting with my ex-husband.
You can't do this!
After her CEO husband fired her and divorced her, she calmly told her assistant, "Fire every one of them. My dear and wonderful family, welcome back. I'm Mr. Peter, your writer and storyteller, and I'm truly grateful you're here today. Before we begin, I want to share something from my heart. Around 98% of the people who watch my videos don't like the video or subscribe. I spend countless hours writing these stories, so your support means more to me than you know. My dream this month is to reach 10,000 subscribers, and I'd be so thankful if you help me get there. If you enjoy my stories, please like this video, leave a comment and subscribe. It's completely free, but it makes a huge difference and encourages me to keep creating. This is the only official and active Mr. Peter Stories World channel. If you see other channels reposting my old videos, please report them and help support original storytelling. Thank you for your love and support. Now, let's begin today's powerful story. The meeting invitation said, Leadership Alignment, 8 o'clock, 4th floor conference room. I got there at 7:40 because my grandmother taught me that the person who arrives first owns the room, and I had been arriving first at that building for 19 years. The room was already owned. Stuart Benke sat at the far end of the table with his jacket still buttoned, which was how you knew something had been rehearsed. Stuart was our chief financial officer, a man who ironed his opinions the night before and wore whichever one the day required. Next to him sat a woman I had never met, grey suit, leather folder, the particular stillness of somebody paid by the hour to watch other people's worst mornings. There was no one else, no leadership, no alignment. "Cora," Stuart said, "thank you for coming in early. This will be brief." I set my bag on the chair beside me and did not sit down. 19 years in grocery teaches you to read a room the way you read a loading dock. Something was off the truck already, and it was not going back on. "Where is everyone, Stuart?" The woman in the grey suit opened her folder. "Mrs. Pryor, my name is Deborah Sietsema. I am outside counsel retained by the company. Please have a seat." "Dressler," I said. "My name on the payroll is Cora Dressler. It has been Dressler on that payroll since I was 23 years old, and it was Dressler on the front of this company for 40 years before that. Say what you brought me here to say." She slid a single page across the table, one page, 19 years, and they had gotten it onto one page. I read it standing up. The words came in the order such words always come. Termination for cause, effective immediately. An internal review had identified financial irregularities in the administration of the Frieda Dressler Family Foundation. Unauthorized disbursements, breach of fiduciary duty. The company reserved all rights and remedies. I read it twice, and the second time was not because I did not understand it. The second time was because I wanted to be sure of the signatures at the bottom. There were 5 of them. Stuart Benke's was the third. "Financial irregularities," I said. "The review documented a pattern of disbursements from the Foundation's hardship fund that lacked proper authorization," the lawyer said. "The company considered its options carefully. Given your position and your family connection, the board felt a quiet separation served everyone." "The hardship fund," I said, "gives grocery money to cashiers whose husbands are in the hospital. It bought a water heater last winter for a man who has stocked shelves for us since Reagan was governor of California. My grandmother started that fund out of a cigar box under Register 2. I would like to see this review." "That will not be possible at this time." "Who conducted it?" "That is privileged." "Who authorized it?" The lawyer looked at Stuart, and Stuart looked at the table, and the table had nothing to say either. So I asked the only question left. "Does my husband know this meeting is happening?" Deborah Sietsema had been doing this a long time. I will give her that. Her face did not move, but there is a kind of silence that is its own signature, and the room filled with it, wall to wall. I turned around. Our headquarters takes up 3 floors of a glass building on Central Avenue, Midtown Phoenix, and Leland liked the 4th floor to be transparent. Glass offices, glass conference rooms. He called it a culture of visibility. Across the open floor, behind the glass wall of the corner office that used to have my grandmother's rocking chair in it, my husband stood with his back to me, holding his phone to his ear. He was not talking. I had been married to Leland Pryor for 11 years, and I knew the set of his shoulders when he was talking, and the set of them when he was hiding inside the shape of a phone call. And this was the second one. He knew I was looking. The glass told him. He did not turn around. "There is a security officer outside the door," the lawyer said behind me, gently, "the way you tell somebody the road is closed. He will accompany you to collect your personal effects. The company asks that you not access your computer or contact staff on your way out." Here is what I want to say about that walk, because I have thought about it many times since. Our floor had 41 people on it that morning. I had hired 11 of them myself. I had trained store managers, who trained the managers, who trained half of the rest. When the elevator doors opened, and I came out with a cardboard box and a security officer named Reyes, who could not look at me, 41 people found something urgent on their screens. Except one. Bernice Kaminsky stood up at her desk outside the foundation office, 59 years old, silver hair pinned the way she had pinned it since her wedding, a woman who had answered my phone and guarded my calendar for 14 years. She stood up in the middle of all that glass and all that silence, and she did not say a word, because words would have gotten her walked out too. She just stood, with her hands folded in front of her, the way people stand in church when the casket goes by. It was the only dignity in the building that morning, and it belonged to a secretary. "Thank you, Bernice," I said, as if she had brought me coffee, and I kept walking. The elevator was mirrored. I watched myself hold a cardboard box that contained a photograph of my grandmother in front of the first store in 1962, a jade plant, and 19 years, and I made myself a promise between the 4th floor and the garage. Whatever happened next, these people were not going to be given the pleasure of watching me break. Grief is private property. My grandmother taught me that too, standing dry-eyed at my grandfather's funeral and crying that night at her kitchen sink, where only God and I could see her. The parking garage under the building holds the heat all summer, and it was June in Phoenix, which means the air down there was like standing behind a running engine. My keycard was supposed to raise the gate. I already knew it would not, and it did not. The light on the reader blinked red, twice, like the building itself had been given instructions about me. Reyes reached past me and swiped his own card. "For what it is worth, Mrs. Dressler," he said quietly, and stopped, because it was not worth anything, and we both knew it, and because he had used my right name, and that was worth more than the rest of the sentence anyway. A man was leaning against the pillar next to my car. He was maybe 30, khakis, golf shirt, a manila envelope in his hand, and an expression of professional apology on his face, and I knew what he was before he opened his mouth, because you do not survive 4 decades in the grocery business, even standing next to it, without learning what every kind of delivery looks like. "Cora Dressler Pryor?" he asked. "Cora Dressler," I said. "Yes." "Ma'am, I am serving you with a petition for dissolution of marriage, filed in the Superior Court of Arizona, Maricopa County. You have been served as of this date and time. I'm required to note your response." He held out the envelope. The garage was silent, except for the hum of somebody's air conditioner condenser and my own pulse, which I could hear, and which I was pleased to notice was steady. Fired at 8 o'clock, divorced by 8:45, 11 years of marriage and 19 years of work, both terminated before the morning rush hour, cleared the Interstate 10 interchange. I took the envelope. I signed the acknowledgement on his little electronic pad, and my signature came out smooth, and I was proud of my hand for that. "You are the calmest one I have had all year," the young man said, and then looked mortified, because that was clearly a thing he was not supposed to say. "I own a lot of practice," I told him. "Thank you for doing your job politely. Not everyone does, this early." He left. Reyes left, after standing there a moment longer than his instructions required, which I have not forgotten, and I sat in my car with the engine off and the heat pressing down and the cardboard box on the passenger seat, where my purse used to ride, and I opened the envelope because you always read the paperwork. Every clerk my grandmother ever trained heard the same sermon. Read it before you sign it. Read it after you receive it. The truth is always in the paper, and the paper does not care about your feelings. Petition for dissolution of marriage. In the marriage of Leland A. Pryor, petitioner, and Cora F. Dressler, respondent. His attorneys were the big ones, the tower downtown. No surprises on the first page or the second. The surprise was small, and it was blue, and it sat in the corner of the first page, where the clerk of the court stamps the filing date. I looked at it for a long time. The garage hummed. Somewhere above me, on the 4th floor, 41 people were pretending to work, and my husband was holding a phone with nobody on it. The stamp was dated 4 days ago. He had filed on Thursday. He had sat across from me at dinner on Thursday night, and Friday, and through the weekend. He had asked me on Sunday whether we should drive up to Prescott when the heat broke, and he had watched me answer, already knowing that a young man in khakis and a woman in a grey suit were on his calendar for Monday, filed and stamped and scheduled, one right after the other. The firing and the divorce were not two blows, they were one plan, and I was the last person in that building to know it. Chapter 2. The house on the hill. I did not drive home. I want to be honest about that, because it mattered later, and because it told me something about myself before I was ready to hear it. Home was the house Leland and I had bought in the Biltmore corridor 9 years ago, all pale stone and clean lines, a house that photographed beautifully and had never once smelled like anything cooking. My clothes were there, my toothbrush was there, my marriage was there, lying on the floor in whatever shape a marriage takes when one person has already left it and the other one is still paying the utilities. I drove north instead, up 7th Street with the morning traffic thinning, past the wall of Sunnyslope Mountain with the white painted S on its shoulder, and I turned onto the block where my grandmother's brick house has stood since Eisenhower was president. I still owned it. I had never been able to explain to Leland why I kept it, why I paid a neighbor boy to water the oleanders and ran the swamp cooler once a month so the seals would not dry out. He called it the museum. He thought he was insulting it. The key knew my hand. The door swung into that smell that has no name, old evaporative cooling and lemon oil, and 60 years of tortillas and coffee soaked into plaster, and I got as far as the kitchen before my legs decided the performance was over. I sat down at Frieda Dressler's kitchen table in the chair that had always been mine, and I put the cardboard box and the manila envelope in front of me, and I shook for a while. Not crying. Just shaking, the way a truck shakes when the engine is still running but the load is gone. My grandmother came to Phoenix in 1957 with a husband, a baby, and $140 sewed into the hem of a coat nobody needs in Arizona. My grandfather was a good man with bad lungs, and the desert was supposed to fix him, and it did not. By 1961, she was a widow with a little boy, and in 1962, she signed a lease on a failing corner market on Hatcher Road because the owner was desperate enough to rent to a woman. Every banker in Phoenix turned her down. She used to name them at this table like a rosary, all those men in air-conditioned offices, and she never said it with bitterness. She said it the way you read a list of ingredients. Then one small bank took a chance, and she paid that loan back early, and she banked there for the rest of her life and made her managers do the same, and she told me why 100 times. You remember who fed you when you were nobody, Cora. Institutions are just people wearing buildings. Dressler's Market #1. She stocked what Sunnyslope actually ate, which the chains never bothered to learn. She gave credit in a spiral notebook to families the chains would not look at. And she collected on that notebook too, because kindness without a spine is just a slower way of closing. By 1970, there were 3 stores. By the time my father took over the produce side, there were 9. By the time a drunk driver on Grand Avenue took my father, there were 14, and there was me, 23 years old, standing in a cooler crying into a pallet of romaine. And my grandmother came in and handed me a box cutter and said, "The truck does not care, honey, and neither does the lettuce. We work first, we weep after." I was raised in those aisles the way other children are raised in backyards. I could face a shelf before I could ride a bicycle, and I want it understood because Leland's people spent years softening this fact into a decoration, that I was not a mascot. I ran the training program. Every store manager in the company for the last decade and a half came up through a curriculum I wrote at this table. I ran the foundation. I knew every butcher and every bakery lead and which cashier's son was deployed overseas, and none of that appears on an organizational chart, which is exactly why men like Stuart Benker never understood what it weighed. Leland arrived 12 years ago when we were 23 stores and tired. My grandmother was 81, sharp as a razor and honest about arithmetic. And the arithmetic said we needed somebody who spoke the modern language, distribution software, and margin analytics and capital markets. He came from a chain back east, and he was brilliant. That is the part everybody skips now, and skipping it makes the story a lie. He was brilliant, and he was warm in those days, or he wore warmth so well that the difference did not show, and he walked the Tolleson warehouse floor on his second day and learned 40 names in an afternoon. I fell in love with him at a loading dock at 4 in the morning, watching him argue a produce broker, back down off a price with numbers in one hand and charm in the other. My grandmother liked him too, and she was not a woman who liked easily. But she was also not a woman who confused liking with trusting. The signing was in 2015 at this table. I keep it in my mind like a photograph, and only in the last few years did I begin to understand what I was looking at. We had been married 2 years by then. Leland was chief executive and wanted what he called clean governance, and part of clean governance was a voting agreement, because I had inherited my father's shares already and stood to inherit hers, and a company cannot steer with its stock scattered through a family like loose change. It made sense. It still makes sense. That is the terrible thing about clever men, that their traps are load-bearing. Ambrose Feld drafted it. He had been my grandmother's lawyer since 1974, a tall, careful man who wore a suit to a kitchen table, and my grandmother made him read it out loud. All of it. Every clause, every whereas, while the coffee went cold, and Leland smiled the smile of a patient man and checked his watch twice. I remember being embarrassed for her. God forgive me. I remember thinking, Grandma, he is on our side. She stopped Ambrose once near the end and made him read one part again. I do not remember the words. I remember her looking at Leland while the words were read, and I remember Leland looking at his watch, and I remember her small nod to Ambrose, not to us, like a woman confirming a lock had clicked. Then she signed, and I never read that agreement again. I was in love. Love does not proofread. She died in the spring of 2020, 90 years old, in the back bedroom of this house with a store manager's schedule dispute still open on her nightstand because she never did learn how to be retired. She left me her shares, and I gave the votes that came with them to my husband's judgment, the way I had been giving him things for years by then, quietly, one at a time, the way sand leaves a shore. He renamed the company 18 months later. The brand consultant said Dressler's Family Market sounded regional and dated. The signs came down store by store, and the new logo went up, all lowercase, and at the ribbon cutting for the rebrand, my husband gave a speech about honoring our legacy by refusing to be limited by it, and I stood beside him and clapped, and somewhere in me a woman at a kitchen table set down her coffee and looked at me and said nothing. I sat in her chair now with the petition in front of me and the blue stamp that said Thursday, and I did the thing I had been circling since the parking garage. I stopped asking what I had lost and started asking what I still held. The house. Some money of my own, and the shares. 51% of a company my husband was running, my votes riding along behind his signature like an empty rail car, the way they had for 11 years. Fired for cause, the paper said. Anyone fired for cause is meant to feel like a criminal, and criminals do not check their property rights. That is what the ethics report was for. I understood that suddenly and completely, sitting in the smell of lemon oil, and the understanding did not make me feel better. It made me feel aimed at. I did not call a divorce lawyer. Everyone calls a divorce lawyer first, and I would need one. But paper before feelings, truth is in the paper. There was one man alive who had read every document my family ever signed, and who had read one of them out loud twice. His number was still in the address book my grandmother kept by the wall telephone, in her upright handwriting under F. He answered on the first ring, no secretary, no hold music, just an old man's voice in a quiet room, and I said, "Mr. Feld, this is Cora Dressler, Frida's granddaughter. I am sorry to call out of nowhere after all these years, but I have a question about my shares, and I did not know who else would still have the file." There was a silence on the line, but it was not the silence of a man searching his memory. "Cora," Ambrose Feld said, "I've been waiting 11 years for this call. Tell me, and be precise because it matters more than you know. Has he filed, or has he only threatened?" Chapter 3. The clause and the warning. Ambrose Feld practiced law out of a converted bungalow off Encanto Boulevard, one of those small brick houses from the 20s with a deep porch and a citrus tree in the yard, in the old neighborhood where the streets curved just to be beautiful. There was no sign out front, except a brass plate the size of an envelope. He had argued cases downtown for 50 years, he told me once, and had earned the right to finish his career in a building with a kitchen. He met me on the porch. I had not seen him since my grandmother's funeral, and time had made him thinner and slower and had not touched his eyes at all. He wore a suit. It was 104 degrees in the shade, and Ambrose Feld wore a suit, because in his mind he was receiving a client, and receiving a client is a formal act. "You look like her," he said. "She would have hated this morning, and she would not have been surprised by it. Come inside where the air conditioning is winning." The front room of the bungalow was walled with filing cabinets, actual steel filing cabinets, and on the desk, already waiting, sat a folder so old its edges had gone soft as cloth. He had pulled it before I arrived. He poured me ice water from a sweating pitcher, sat down across the desk, put on his glasses, and became, in the space of one breath, entirely a lawyer. "On the telephone you told me he filed a petition for dissolution on Thursday and served you this morning, minutes after the company terminated you for cause. I asked you to bring the petition. May I see the stamp?" I handed it across. He examined the blue stamp the way a jeweler examines a stone, and then he set the petition down, opened the soft old folder, and turned it to face me. "Shareholder voting agreement, executed in 2015 at your grandmother's kitchen table. You signed it. He signed it. I drafted it, and Frida edited it. And I want you to understand that second part, because everyone who ever underestimated your grandmother is either poorer now or dead. Do you remember the afternoon we signed this? I remember you reading it out loud while the coffee went cold. I remember she made you read one part twice. This part." His finger, spotted and steady, came down on the page like a gavel. "Read it to me, out loud. In this office we read things out loud. It is an old superstition of mine. Words behave differently when they have to pass through the air." I read it. Section 11. headed termination. The agreement and all proxies and voting rights granted under it shall terminate automatically, immediately, and irrevocably upon the earliest of the following events. And there was a short list: death, mutual written consent, sale of the shares. And then the last line, the one that had been sitting quietly in a steel cabinet in a bungalow for 11 years, the filing by either spouse of a petition for dissolution of marriage. The room hummed. Somewhere behind the walls, the old house's air conditioner labored against the desert, and I read the line again and a third time, and the words did not change. He needed the shares to vote his way for as long as he ran the company, Ambrose said. That was reasonable, and I wrote it that way. Your grandmother added the divorce provision herself. She dictated it standing at the stove with her back to me, and I recall her exact words because I wrote them down and then translated them into English a court would respect. She said, Ambrose, if that man ever stops being her husband, he stops being her voice the same minute. Not when a judge says so. Judges take years. The minute the paper is stamped. Did he know? My voice came out lower than I meant it to. Leland. Did he know what he was signing? He was given the document. It was read aloud in his presence, which you witnessed. Whether a man in a hurry hears a clause that will not matter unless he betrays his wife, I cannot tell you. In my experience, men like your husband do not read termination provisions for the same reason healthy people do not read tombstones. He folded his hands. Cora, I am going to say the important thing now, and I want you to hold your relief until I have finished, because relief makes people deaf. As of the moment the clerk of the Superior Court stamped his petition on Thursday morning, the voting agreement is dead. The votes attached to your 51% belong to you and to no one else. Your husband walked into that courthouse carrying the only weapon on earth that could take his company away from him, and he fired it at himself, and he does not know it yet. His own lawyers likely do not know it, because the company's file copy of this agreement should contain the executed original or a certified duplicate, and I would be very interested to learn whether it still does. He let that sit, and then he leaned forward, and his voice put on weight. Now the warning. You came here expecting a lawyer to hand you a sword, and I have, but hear me clearly. This clause has never been tested. Automatic termination upon a divorce filing is enforceable in my professional judgment, and my professional judgment has been wrong 4 times in 51 years, and I remember each occasion in detail. His attorneys are the tower downtown. Their answer to this clause will not be surrender. Their answer will be litigation, injunctions, emergency motions, a request to freeze everything while the question is studied, and studying is a thing they can make last 2 years. If you announce this tomorrow, you will spend those 2 years being technically right while he sells the company out from under the argument. A court can give you damages. It cannot give you back 26 grocery stores once they are gone. You have one bullet, Cora. It fires the first time you stand up in a room where shares are being voted and say the agreement is dead. After that, everything is lawyers. So before you fire it, you must know 3 things you do not currently know. You must know what he is selling. You must know why he is selling it. Because a man does not burn down his own kingdom for a woman in a portfolio. There is always a wound under the ambition. And you must know exactly what that ethics report says, because it was not written to fire you. Terminating you required 1 paragraph. That report exists to make sure that when you finally raise your hand, every person in the room has already been told you are a thief. So I say nothing. You say nothing. You sign nothing. Above all, you agree to nothing in the divorce, no matter how generous it smells, because every offer that crosses your table between now and the day this company changes hands has one purpose, which is to buy your silence at a discount before anyone realizes what your silence is worth. You are about to be underestimated with great energy by expensive people. Your grandmother built this company on being underestimated. Consider it the family trade. He walked me to the porch. The heat came up off the street in visible waves, and the citrus leaves hung still as paper, and at the bottom step he touched my elbow, and the lawyer in him stepped aside for a moment. "She knew, you understand," he said. "Not the details, the shape. Women who build things out of nothing learn the shape of the men who take things, the way ranchers learn the sky. 11 years ago, she bought you an umbrella. It has been in my filing cabinet ever since, waiting for rain. Try not to open it early." I was 3 blocks from Encanto Boulevard, stopped at a light on 7th Avenue with the air conditioning roaring, when my telephone lit up on the passenger seat with a news alert from the Arizona Republic. Grocery chain chief executive Leland Pryor, speaking at a Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce luncheon, announces that the company is entering a new chapter and that the Dressler family has entrusted the future of the business to his vision. There was a photograph. Leland at the head table, silver at his temples, hand half raised in that gesture he practices, the one that looks like modesty from the back of a room. And one seat to his left, in a cream suit, with a portfolio closed in front of her like a place setting, sat a woman the caption identified as Annalise Court, Managing Director, Corvan Capital. The light turned green. I did not move until the car behind me made its feelings known. He had fired me from my grandmother's company at 8 in the morning, divorced me by 9, and by lunch he was downtown spending my family's name to sell it, with the buyer already seated at the table. The Dressler family has entrusted the future of the business to his vision. The Dressler family, as of Thursday morning at 9:41, when a clerk of the Superior Court of Maricopa County pressed a blue stamp onto his petition, was me. He just did not know it yet. Chapter 4. A customer in her own stores. There is a certain kind of freedom that only arrives disguised as ruin. For 19 years I had walked into our stores the way an inspector walks in, announced by my face, and every shelf stood a little straighter while I passed. Now I was nobody. Fired, disgraced if the whispers had started, invisible. Invisible people see everything. I started in Maryvale on a Wednesday morning, in jeans and my dead father's ball cap, pushing a cart through store number 11 on 51st Avenue. My grandmother had opened that store in 1979 because the chains had decided the West Side was not worth their trucks, and she had stocked it like a promise. It was the promise I went looking for. I found a produce section, running at maybe 70%, brown-edged lettuce nobody had culled since the day before, and one teenager working a department that needed 4 hands. I found the Tuesday senior discount signs taken down. I found a woman my age studying the price of ground beef, the way you study a bill you cannot pay, doing arithmetic with her lips moving. I found Rosa Fuentes at Register 3, 26 years with us, a cashier my grandmother had personally moved to days so she could meet her kids after school. Her name tag now said team member. Under her breath to the bagger, while the belt hummed, I heard her say they had cut her to 28 hours, and 28 hours meant no benefits, and her husband's insulin did not care how many hours corporate approved. I paid cash and did not let her see my face, and I sat in the parking lot afterward with my hands on the wheel, not driving. Mesa was worse in a quieter way. The store was clean and the shelves were full, because Mesa's zip codes photographed well, and what had been cut there was people. Veterans of 2 decades demoted to part-time, replaced by a scheduling algorithm Leland's operations man had bought from a consultant. The deli line was 11 customers long with 1 worker slicing, and I watched 3 of the 11 set down their numbers and leave. I wrote it all down in a spiral notebook, aisle by aisle, name by name, because that is how my family has always done its accounting, and because a woman writing in a notebook in a grocery store looks like a coupon shopper and not like 51%. Bernice found me on the 3rd day. I had not called her, out of caution for her paycheck, but caution was wasted because they had walked her out on Tuesday. 14 years of answering my telephone had made her a security risk. She appeared on the porch of my grandmother's house with a casserole dish in one hand and a banker's box in the other, and she said, "The casserole is because you are grieving. The box is because I do not forget things," and they did not say one word about my personal files. We set up in Frida's dining room like a campaign office. Bernice took the wall by the china cabinet and began pinning index cards to a corkboard she bought at a school supply store. 1 card per store, 1 card per name. She had been a church secretary before she was mine, and there is no intelligence agency on this earth as thorough as a woman who has organized 20 years of funeral potlucks. On Friday, I drove out Interstate 10 to a diner near 91st Avenue, in the shadow of the warehouses, where the west side flattens out into the Tolleson distribution corridor. Half the groceries in Metro Phoenix pass through that corridor. Ours came through a distribution center my grandmother had built in 1988, 11 acres of cold storage and dock doors, and the woman who ran it had asked me to meet her somewhere the company badges did not eat. Yolanda Diggs had been moving freight for us for 30 years, the last 9 running the whole building. She came in wearing her safety vest, like she had no intention of pretending this was social, sat down across from me, ordered coffee, and looked at me for a while. "They are saying you stole from the hardship fund," she said. "I want you to hear that I said in the break room, in front of the shift, that the day Cora Dressler steals from a cashier is the day the sun comes up in the west. Now tell me why I am really here. Because trucks I can schedule, but I cannot schedule what is happening to this company. Tell me what you see, Yolanda. From the dock." She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn, which I would learn was her way of deciding how much truth a person could lift. "Vendors are stretched to 90 days, she said. "Some past it. I have brokers calling my cell phone at night because accounts payable stopped answering theirs. And these are relationships your grandmother built, Cora. These are second-generation handshake people. 2 weeks ago, I had a produce supplier out of Nogales refuse a load until he saw a wire transfer. In 30 years, I have never had anyone demand cash before cucumbers. Routes changed in the spring and nobody could tell me why. We are running trucks in patterns that burn fuel to save a number somewhere I am not allowed to see. And the Nevada stores." She stopped and turned the cup again. "The Nevada stores closed 2 years ago," I said. "The stores closed," Yolanda said. "The freight never made sense before or after. For 2 years I moved product to Las Vegas at volumes that did not match what those 6 stores could sell. And when they shut down, the write-offs came through my building in waves, and every time I asked a question, the question went up to Mr. Benke's office and never came back down. I kept my copies because my mother did not raise a woman who hands over her only copy of anything. Whatever died up there in Nevada, it is still on the book somewhere, breathing." She slid a thumb drive across the table, inside a napkin, like contraband, and I suppose it was. "One more thing," she said, standing, vest rustling. "Whatever you are doing, do it faster. There are men in suits walking my warehouse with tape measures. Nobody measures a building they intend to keep. On Saturday, I went to Sunnyslope, to store number 1, because I needed to stand in it the way some people need to stand in a church. It was 6 in the evening, and the store was busy and short-handed, and I was in the 3rd aisle with a basket, when a young manager I did not recognize, a boy of maybe 25, with a lanyard and a walkie-talkie, stopped beside me with the practiced politeness they teach now. "Ma'am, I have noticed you have been in the store a while writing things down. If you are not going to make a purchase, I am going to have to ask you to move along. Corporate has us watching for, auditors and such." Watching for auditors. In my grandmother's first store, they had been instructed to fear people with notebooks. "I am going to make a purchase," I told him, and I did. The woman ahead of me at the register was young, with a toddler on her hip and a card that declined once, then twice, and I watched her begin the arithmetic of shame, deciding which items to hand back, starting with the strawberries, because children eat strawberries like joy itself, and joy is always the first thing returned. "Run it all with mine," I told the cashier, and when the young mother turned to protest, I said what my grandmother said in that same store for 40 years, the sentence I was raised on. "You would do it for me." That is how this store has always worked. The manager with the lanyard watched, uncertain, feeling that something had happened in his store that was above his pay grade, and he was right. I got home after dark. Bernice was still at the corkboard, her reading glasses down her nose, and she did not say hello. She held up a single sheet of paper, and her hand, which had been steady through 14 years and 2 church schisms, was not entirely steady now. "I have been reconciling the Foundation's old statements against my personal files," she said. "The hardship fund, the one they say you looted." "Tell me." "It was emptied, Cora, 8 months ago. $260,000, moved out in 4 transfers to an account coded as an intercompany receivable, whatever that means when it is at home. And I have the authorization page." She set it down on Frida's dining table and put her finger on the signature, flat and neat as a hospital corner. "Stuart Benke." "They accused you," Bernice said quietly, "of the exact thing they had already done." Chapter 5, The Generous Offer. The mediation was held on the 14th floor of the tower downtown, in a conference room with a view clear to South Mountain, at a table long enough to seat every mistake I had ever made. Ambrose had found me a divorce attorney, a precise, unhurried woman named Palmer Rayburn, who had spent 30 years in family law and had a voice like a locked door. Her instructions in the elevator were simple. You are sad, you are tired, you are overwhelmed, you listen, you ask for time, you commit to nothing. Today, they show us the shape of what they want. The shape will tell us everything. Leland was already seated when we came in, 11 years of marriage, and he had chosen the far side of the table and the middle chair, flanked by 2 attorneys, and he had dressed the way he dressed for board meetings, and he looked at me with an expression I can only call managerial, concerned, patient, faintly disappointed. It was the face he used on district managers whose numbers had slipped. I had watched him practice it years ago in our bathroom mirror, and I had laughed, and he had laughed too. "Cora," he said, "you look tired. I'm sorry it has come to a room like this." "You booked the room, Leland." His lead attorney moved us along. There were words about efficiency and dignity, about resolving matters comprehensively, and then the shape Palmer had promised began to emerge, paragraph by careful paragraph. They started with the shares. The Dressler stock, his attorney explained, was of course inherited separate property in name, but Arizona law, he said, recognized how 11 years of marriage complicate such things. The company's growth in value had occurred substantially during the marriage and substantially under Mr. Pryor's stewardship. Community effort had enhanced separate property, and the community, meaning Leland, held a claim against that enhancement. Untangling it would require forensic accountants, valuation experts, years of discovery, appeals. He said the word years, the way a dentist says this may pinch. "Alternatively," he said, and slid a folder across the table. The number inside was large. I will not pretend otherwise. It was more money than my grandmother made in her first 30 years of business, offered as a lump settlement, along with the Biltmore house, along with a consulting title, along with, and here the attorney's voice performed generosity, the company's willingness to close the ethics inquiry quietly and issue a statement describing my departure as a retirement, protecting what he called my legacy in the community. In exchange, 1 page at the back. A general release of all claims relating to the company, and my written consent, as a shareholder, to any transaction the board should approve in the following 12 months, my shares to be voted by proxy in favor of the same. There it was, the whole machine laid out on walnut veneer. The divorce was not the point. The firing was not the point. The point was the last page. They needed the widow's granddaughter to sign her voice away one final time, and they were prepared to pay for it exactly once, and to slander her if she declined. "That is a great deal of paper," I said, for a man who told the Chamber of Commerce that the Dressler family had entrusted him with everything already. Leland's jaw did the small thing it does. His attorney was already talking, but Leland lifted a hand and stopped him, and for one moment the manager left his face, and my husband looked at me across the table, and this is the part I have turned over many nights since. "You are never going to understand what this company has to become," he said, and he said it gently. That was the unbearable part, the gentleness. "You count the stores in people, Cora. Rosa's hours, Manny's anniversary, the hardship fund, the notebook. It is beautiful, and I mean that. And it is a museum, and museums close. I am trying to get everyone out of the building before it falls. You would stand in it, handing out strawberries while the roof came down. So yes, I did it this way, all at once, because a long goodbye would have been crueler. To you most of all." He believed it. I could see that he believed it, the way you can see weather. Somewhere in the last 11 years, my husband had told himself a story in which taking everything from me was a rescue, and he had revised it and polished it until he could deliver it gently in front of lawyers, and the story had one hole in it, which is that rescuers do not need you to sign a release. "I would like time to think," I said. "This is a great deal to absorb. I am sure you understand." Palmer gathered the folder. Leland's attorneys exchanged the satisfied stillness of men who believe the fish has taken the hook and merely wishes to swim with it a while. And I looked tired and overwhelmed, and I let them watch me look that way all the way to the elevator. In the car, Palmer finally spoke. "You did well. Now tell me why they are in such a hurry, because that offer was a closing week offer, and nothing about a divorce filed 3 weeks ago should smell like closing week." "I know why," I said. "I cannot tell you yet." "Then tell me this instead. Will you take it? Because I am obligated to say it once. It is a life-changing amount of money, the accusations disappear, and litigation is a furnace that burns years." I watched the tower shrink in the mirror. "My grandmother was offered money for her signature 4 times, I said. She kept the letters in a drawer to stay humble. "No, I will not take it, and I do not want a counteroffer. Ask them for nothing." "Nothing makes lawyers nervous," Palmer said, with the first small smile I had seen from her. "Good. I did one more thing that week, and I have never told anyone why, except that after the mediation I needed to know whether the man across the table still existed anywhere, or whether the story had eaten him entirely. On Thursday afternoon, I followed my husband's car, not to the office and not to the Biltmore corridor. He drove north and west, out Grand Avenue and up the Loop, out to where the desert gives way to the tiled roofs of Sun City, and he parked at a low stucco building with a discreet sign and a courtyard full of shade sails, a memory care residence. I parked across the lot, behind a landscaping trailer, feeling like a criminal and unable to stop. He was inside for an hour. Through the courtyard fence, I could see a slice of the patio, and eventually an aide wheeled a tiny white-haired woman into the shade, and Leland walked beside the chair, and he knelt down in his board meeting suit on the pavers to be at her eye level, and he stayed there, kneeling for a long time, holding her hand, while she looked at him with the polite, drifting expression of someone being visited by a kind stranger. His mother. He had told me she died before we met. He had told everyone that. 11 years, and I learned on a Thursday, from behind a landscaping trailer, that my husband had a living mother in Sun City, and a monthly bill he clearly paid alone, and a grief he had renamed as death, because death at least ends. He came out at 5. He got into his car, and he did not start it. 11 minutes. I timed it, because timing it was easier than feeling it. 11 minutes. My husband sat motionless in a parking lot oven with his hands on the wheel. A boy from nothing who had clawed his way into buildings with air conditioning and had learned somewhere along the climb that the only unforgivable thing in America is to fall back. Then he started the engine and put his public face on in the mirror, the way other men put on sunglasses, and drove away to go sell my grandmother's company. I understood him then. Understanding is not forgiveness. It is worse in a way. Forgiveness closes a wound, and understanding keeps it open and labeled. Palmer called me Friday morning, and her locked door voice had something new in it. Two things. First, they are pressing for your answer on the settlement, which confirms the clock. Second, and I want you very calm while I say this, as routine diligence, I requested copies of all agreements touching your shares. Company counsel responded this morning. Their corporate records contain board minutes referencing a 2015 shareholder voting agreement. She paused. The folder itself is empty, Cora. The executed agreement is missing from the company's files. Someone removed it, and I would bet my license it was not misfiled. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen with the telephone against my ear and the swamp cooler ticking, and I felt the whole game shrink down to a single point of light. Somewhere in a locked steel cabinet, in a brick bungalow off Encanto Boulevard, guarded by a 76-year-old man with a citrus tree, sat the only executed copy of the clause that made me the owner of everything my husband was trying to sell, one piece of paper, one old man, and 11 days until the procedure on his heart. Chapter 6. What a store is. Manny Otero had run the Sunny Slope store for as long as most of its customers had been alive, and he found me on a Tuesday evening in the back corner of the parking lot, where the light poles end and the mountain begins. I had not gone inside. After the boy with the lanyard, I had taken to sitting out there in my car some evenings, the way other people sit outside churches they have quarreled with. Manny came across the asphalt in his apron with 2 paper cups of coffee, handed one through my window, and leaned against the door of the car like the 34 years between us were nothing. The new kid told me a woman with a notebook bought a stranger's groceries last Saturday, he said. Described her. I have been leaving it close every night since, hoping to catch you loitering. Hello, Manny. Mrs. Cora. He sipped his coffee and looked at his store, the low brick building with the mountain behind it, the painted S on the slope going grey in the dusk. They put a memo out about you. I want you to know what I did with it. You do not have to. I read it to the morning crew, he said, out loud in the break room, and when I finished, Esperanza from Bakery said, and I am quoting her, "That is the biggest lie ever printed on company paper," and Ernesto said, and I am quoting him also, "and it had competition. Then we clocked in and faced the shelves. That is what we did with it." I had held together through a firing, a serving, a mediation, and a parking lot in Sun City. A bakery lady I had known since her quinceañera nearly finished me in one sentence. There are boxes in the receiving office, Manny went on, quieter. Transition planning, they are labeled. We were told not to open them. Remedios in receiving cannot read English so good, so naturally she cannot be blamed for what she saw while sealing one back up. New signage, Mrs. Cora, and a floor plan for our store with half the departments gone. Whatever is coming, it has already been printed. He pushed off the car and straightened his apron. Your grandmother hired me when I was 19 and stupid, he said. She told me, Manuel, a store is the only business where the whole neighborhood walks through your door once a week, whether they love you or not, so you get to choose what they walk into. I have been choosing for 34 years. I would like to keep choosing. Whatever you are doing out here in the dark, do it. The corkboard in Frida's dining room had grown into 2 corkboards, and Bernice had begun writing on the window glass with a grease pencil, which she assured me came off, and which I did not care whether it came off. We had the shape of it now, name by name, store by store, what the algorithm had cut, what the vendors were owed. Yolanda's freight records from the thumb drive, printed and taped in columns, the Nevada volumes that made no sense marching down the glass in Bernice's church bulletin handwriting, and on the second board, the other ledger, the one no consultant had ever priced, the hardship fund families, the bus routes that only made sense because store number 1 sat where it sat, the seniors who planned their whole week around the Tuesday discount that had quietly come down off the walls. It was 9 at night, and Bernice was pinning the last of the vendor cards when I finally told her. I had been carrying it for 2 weeks like a coal in my pocket, and I told her all of it. The kitchen table in 2015, the clause my grandmother dictated at the stove, the blue stamp on Leland's petition, and what Ambrose Feld had said it meant, that the votes on 51% of the company had come home to me the moment my husband filed, and that Leland did not know, and that the only executed copy of the proof lay in a steel cabinet off Encanto Boulevard. Bernice sat down slowly in one of Frida's dining chairs. She took off her reading glasses, folded them, and looked at me for a long moment. "Then why?" she said. "Are we whispering?" "Because the moment I stand up in that shareholders' meeting, I own it, Bernice. All of it, not the memory of it. The actual company tonight, as it actually is, vendors 90 days out, a warehouse with men measuring it, whatever Nevada really was. If I take it one day before I understand what is rotten in it, I am not rescuing my grandmother's store. I am volunteering to be the name on the door when it falls." I looked at the window glass, the columns of freight that did not add up. He is selling for a reason. Men like Leland do not sell kingdoms at the top of their voice unless something underneath is on fire. I need to know what is burning before I take the keys. Bernice put her glasses back on, which was her way of ending sentiment. "Then we find the fire," she said. "I will make more coffee." It was past midnight when I finally went looking for a stamp. That is the truth of how it happened, as plain as that. Bernice needed postage for a records request, and Frida kept stamps in the hutch drawer in the back bedroom, and I had not opened that drawer since the spring she died. It stuck, the way it always stuck, and I pulled, and the drawer came out too far, and behind the stamp tin and the rubber bands and the funeral cards, wedged flat against the back panel, was a bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen string. They were addressed to Frida Dressler in a hand I knew better than my own, because I had learned cursive one summer sitting beside the girl who wrote it. Petra's handwriting. 8 envelopes, every one stamped, mailed, and sent back. Return to sender written across each face in my grandmother's upright script, the last 2 in a shakier version of it. My sister had written to a 90-year-old woman 8 times, and 8 times the letters had been refused, and my grandmother had kept everyone, tied with string, hidden behind the stamps, refused and kept. I have thought a long time about a heart that could do both, and I believe now that it was the heart of a woman waiting to be persuaded to change her mind and running out of time to be. I need to say what I believed about my sister, because the record should show what I believed before it shows what was true. Petra was 4 years older, and she was the one who loved the machinery of the business the way I loved the people of it. Freight, margins, shrink, the warehouse. Frida used to say she had 1 granddaughter for the front of the store and 1 for the back. Petra worked under Leland for 6 years after he came, and in 2018 there was, and this is the phrase I accepted and repeated, a betrayal of trust, a disloyalty matter. She had gone around the chief executive, shared confidential financial information outside the company, undermined leadership during a sensitive period. There was a severance, a signed agreement nobody discussed, and a silence at every holiday after. My grandmother, 90 years old and fed the same account I was fed, never spoke her name again at that table. I believed my husband. That is the whole confession. He was gentle and regretful when he explained it, the way he was gentle and regretful at the mediation. And I chose the man in front of me over the sister who had stopped calling, and I told myself her silence proved her guilt, when I, of all people, should have known that in this family silence is only ever grief wearing its work clothes. The envelopes were sealed. Opening the first one felt like surgery on someone I loved. It was dated November of 2018, a month before her exile, and it was not an apology, and it was not a plea. It was a warning typed 2 pages with a handwritten line at the top. Grandma, you will not take my calls, so I am putting this where you have always trusted things to live, on paper. She had found something in the Nevada expansion numbers, projected volumes for the Las Vegas stores that could not be squared against the freight actually contracted, costs routed through entities she could not identify, a structure, she wrote, that she did not fully understand yet, except that it made the expansion look funded when she could not find the funding. I have asked twice through proper channels, my sister wrote, and both times the question disappeared into Stuart's office. I am not going around Leland for ambition. I am going around him because someone has mortgaged something, and I cannot find what, and by the time it surfaces it will have our name on it. The porch light hummed. Bernice had gone home. I sat on the floor of my grandmother's back bedroom with 8 refused letters in my lap, and did the arithmetic of what my family had done to the one person who had tried to sound the alarm. And my own signature was somewhere in the paperwork of her destruction, riding along behind my husband's judgment, the way it always had. The next morning, the notice arrived. It came by certified mail, formal as a summons, on the new letterhead with the lowercase logo. Notice of special meeting of shareholders for the purpose of considering and voting upon a proposed transaction with entities affiliated with Corvan Capital. Bernice read it over my shoulder and got there first. They moved it, she said. Palmer's memo said they were targeting the end of the month. This is the 14th. Cora, they moved it up 11 days. I was already looking past the date, at the calendar taped to Frida's refrigerator, where I had written one appointment in red the week before, because some appointments you write in red. The meeting was the 14th. Ambrose Feld's heart procedure was the 12th. Chapter 7. His perfect week. The story broke on Sunday, which is the day you leak a thing when you want it read at every kitchen table in the state. Former grocery executive terminated amid foundation inquiry, the headline said, and the article underneath was a masterpiece of the passive voice. Documents suggested. Sources familiar with the review indicated. Questions had been raised about disbursements personally directed by me from a charitable fund, and the company declined to comment on personnel matters, but confirmed its commitment to the highest ethical standards. There was a photograph of me from a ribbon cutting years ago, smiling, scissors in hand, chosen because a smiling woman above that headline looks like a woman who thought she had gotten away with something. By Monday, I could measure the article's reach in silences. The church friends who did not call, the neighbor who waved from one driveway over instead of walking across. Esperanza from the bakery texted Bernice a single line, "We do not believe one word, tell her," and I taped it to the refrigerator next to the calendar, because you keep the loaves you have when the locusts come. On Tuesday, the court deferred us. Palmer had moved to compel the company to produce the ethics review, the whole file, on the sensible ground that a woman accused in the newspapers of theft was entitled to see the accusation. The company's lawyers answered with a stack of privilege arguments 8 inches thick, and the judge, buried in a summer docket, set the matter over for 60 days. 60 days. The meeting was in 9. "They are not trying to win," Palmer said on the telephone, and her locked door voice had gone grim. "They are trying to be slower than you. Every ruling we would win arrives after the only date that matters." On Wednesday, Corvan confirmed its financing. It came as a press release, institutional and grey, committed debt and equity financing for a strategic transaction in the grocery sector, and the Arizona Republic ran it 4 paragraphs long with a quotation from Leland about the next chapter and a photograph of him shaking hands with a man from the bank tower, and I read it standing at the kitchen counter and understood that I was watching the machine finish its assembly in public, gear by gear, while everyone applauded. On Thursday, the boxes opened. Manny called at 7 in the morning. The instruction had come overnight, he said. Transition packets were to be distributed to all store directors by end of week. His had a new organizational chart, with his store reporting to a regional integration office, a retention bonus offer with a confidentiality clause stapled to it, and a frequently asked questions page. And the third question was, what happens to underperforming banners? And the answer used the word rationalization, and there was a list, and Sunnyslope was on it. 34 years, Manny said, and I find out from a stapled packet. He was quiet a moment. The retention bonus is 8 weeks of pay, Mrs. Cora. They priced my whole life at 8 weeks. On Friday, they took Ambrose. That is not the right verb, and it is the only one that has ever felt true. His cardiologist's office called him Thursday afternoon. A cancellation had opened up. The doctor preferred not to wait given the last set of results, and the procedure originally set for the 12th would now be Saturday morning. Ambrose telephoned me himself Thursday night to say it, dry as ever, that he did not love the timing and had no evidence for what he suspected about it, and that a man his age does not decline an earlier date with a cardiologist on the strength of a suspicion. Listen to me carefully, he said. The original agreement is in Cabinet 4, Drawer 2, in a green pressboard folder, along with a certified copy I made in 2015 because your grandmother told me to make one, and I have never disobeyed her yet. My associate, Miss Okafor, comes in Mondays and Thursdays. The office alarm code is your grandmother's birth year. If anything about Saturday goes other than routinely, you are to go to the office before you go to the hospital. Do you understand me? The paper first. She would tell you the same, and you know it. Saturday morning I sat in the family waiting area at the Heart Hospital off Thomas Road with Bernice beside me, and the procedure that was scheduled for 90 minutes took 4 hours. He survived it. I want that said plainly, because for 2 of those hours I had begun composing the other sentence in my head. He survived it, but there had been what the surgeon called a complication, managed, and there would now be days in cardiac intensive care where visitors were family only, and telephones were confiscated at the door, and his associate Miss Okafor was in Ghana for her sister's wedding until the 16th, and the bungalow off Encanto Boulevard stood locked with its citrus tree and its steel cabinets, and the alarm code was my grandmother's birth year, and I did not go. I want that recorded too. The paper first, he had said, and I sat in a waiting room instead, holding a paper cup of hospital coffee, because an old man who had guarded my family for 50 years was alone behind those doors, and there are moments the ledger has to wait, whatever it costs, and I would learn soon enough exactly what it cost. Sunday night, I called Spokane. I had found the number 2 days earlier through a co-op newsletter Bernice unearthed, Petra Dressler, operations consultant, and I had stared at it for 2 days, the way you stare at deep water. Now, with the meeting 4 days out, and the letters read and my own signature turning in my stomach, I dialed. It rang 4 times, and my sister's recorded voice, older, flatter, said to leave a message. Petra, it is Cora. Everything I had rehearsed collapsed at the sound of my own name. I found your letters to Grandma. All 8. She kept them, Petra, she refused them, and she kept them, and I have read the first one, and I know I am 8 years too late to be calling, and I am calling anyway. The company is being sold on Thursday. I think you were right. I think you were right about all of it. And I think what happened to you in 2018 was built. The same way what happened to me last month was built, and I stopped. Need was the wrong word to send into 8 years of silence. I wanted you to hear it from me, that I know, that is all, I know. I hung up and the house was very quiet, and the telephone did not ring back that night or the next. On Tuesday, 2 days before the vote, I did something Palmer would have forbidden, which is why I did not ask her. Leland was hosting a dinner at a restaurant in the Biltmore corridor, one of those glass and brass rooms off Camelback Road where deals go to be toasted, and I knew because Bernice still had lunch every month with an executive assistant who owed her from a funeral. The private dining room had a wall of windows onto the patio, and the patio had a long communal table, and a woman in a linen dress with a book and a glass of wine at the far end of a communal table is furniture. I sat in the warm dark for an hour, close enough to see and not to hear, and I watched my husband hold court. He was luminous, that is the word. Whatever was burning underneath, the surface of him had never been better, laughing, conducting the table with his glass, and at his right hand sat Annalise Court in cream, cool as the far side of a pillow, and I watched her the way Yolanda watches a load she does not trust. Near 10, a younger man from her side of the table leaned in with his telephone, and I could read the shape of urgency, if not the words, and the word that carried across the patio glass, because certain words carry, was delay. Something about the vote, a filing, a wrinkle, and heads turned toward Annalise for weather. She did not look up from her wine. She said something short, 5 or 6 words, and the younger man laughed, relieved, and the table rolled on, and it was 2 hours later, lying awake in my grandmother's house, that I finally arranged the shape her mouth had made into a sentence, because I had watched it made and could run it back like film. Either way, we already own the building. I turned it over and could not make it open. A figure of speech, confidence, arrogance. Nothing about it fit anything on my corkboards, and everything about it frightened me in a low, structural way, like a sound in a foundation. At 11 minutes past midnight, the telephone rang. Spokane. I sat straight up in the dark and answered, and there was a silence on the line with breathing in it, and then my sister's voice, 8 years older, flat and cold as a dock in January. Do not let that vote happen Thursday, Petra said. Whatever you think he is selling, that is not what is being sold. And Cora, do not mistake this call for anything. I am not doing it for you, Petra. The line was already dead. Chapter 8. The Meeting. The morning of the vote, I went for the paper first. Ambrose was awake in cardiac intensive care by then, tethered to machines and forbidden telephones, and he had managed to send me one message through a night nurse who owed him nothing and did it anyway. 3 words on a torn corner of a menu. Cabinet 4. Go. The bungalow off Encanto Boulevard was cool and dim and smelled like paper and floor wax. Palmer came with me, because a document that is about to carry this much weight should be retrieved by an officer of the court and not by a desperate wife. The alarm code was my grandmother's birth year. Cabinet 4, drawer 2, a green pressboard folder gone soft at the corners, and inside it the executed original of the 2015 voting agreement and the certified copy Ambrose had made because Frieda Dressler told him to, and standing in that quiet room, I put my hand flat on the folder for a moment, the way you touch a shoulder. 11 years in a filing cabinet, Palmer said quietly, waiting for one morning. Let us not be late to it. The special meeting of shareholders was held at 11 o'clock in a ballroom of a hotel off Camelback Road because our own headquarters did not have a room that could hold this much lawyering. Rows of chairs, a dais, court reporters and counsel and proxies, my cousin's shares represented by a man none of my cousins had ever met, and at the front table, flanked by attorneys, my husband, in the navy suit I had picked out with him in Scottsdale 4 years ago. Annalise Court sat in the second row with her portfolio closed in front of her, and she was the only person in the room who looked like the outcome was a matter of mild professional curiosity. I sat at the back with Palmer and Bernice, and I let the machine run. There were preliminaries. There was a presentation, slides about strategic imperatives and unlocked value, and Leland spoke for 9 minutes without notes, and he was excellent. He was always excellent, and I watched the man I married sell the room a future with no one I loved in it. Then the roll call of shares, and the vote on the transaction, and the moment the record should preserve exactly. The chair notes, his lead attorney said, that Mr. Pryor holds and votes, pursuant to the shareholder voting agreement of record, the Dressler family block, constituting 51% of shares outstanding, and casts those shares in favor of the transaction. No, I said, he does not. Standing up in that room was the easiest thing I had done in a month. Every eye came around, and I watched recognition move through the rows, the disgraced woman from the newspapers, and I walked to the front with the green folder in my hands, and Palmer's voice, calm as a locked door, did the lawyering. For the record, we present the executed original of the 2015 shareholder voting agreement, together with a certified copy. Counsel will direct attention to Section 11. Termination. The agreement and all voting rights granted under it terminate automatically, immediately, and irrevocably upon the filing by either spouse of a petition for dissolution of marriage. She laid the second document beside it. We further present a certified copy of the petition for dissolution filed by Leland A. Pryor in the Superior Court of Arizona, Maricopa County, stamped by the clerk at 9:41 in the morning 26 days ago. The agreement terminated at that moment as a matter of its own plain terms. Since that moment, the only person entitled to vote the Dressler shares has been sitting in this room, being called a thief. The silence had a texture to it. I have unloaded trucks in monsoon season, and I know the sound a room makes when the pressure changes. Leland's attorneys went to work, of course, privileged review, authenticity, adjournment, and Palmer stood there like weather while they broke against her. And Leland himself said nothing, because he was reading Section 11, and I watched my husband find the sentence, the one his wife's grandmother dictated standing at a stove with her back to the lawyer, and I watched 11 years of certainty leave a man's face in about 4 seconds. He looked up at me, not at Palmer, at me. She knew, he said. Just that, not a question. She knew you, I said. The shares will be voted, Palmer said, by their owner. Cora Dressler, 51%, I said. Against. The transaction failed. There is a great deal of procedure in the transcript, objections and reservations of rights, but that is what the transcript says at the bottom. The motion fails. And while the lawyers were still stacking their reservations, Annalise Court stood up in the second row, buttoned her jacket, and paused at the end of Leland's table on her way out. For what it is worth, she told him pleasantly, my firm priced every asset in this company months ago. You were the only one we were never buying. Then she was gone, and she did not look troubled, and some cold part of me filed that away, that the buyer had just lost the deal of the year and left the room like a woman whose flight was merely delayed. There was one more piece of business, and I did it from the dais microphone so the record would hold it. As holder of a majority of the shares, I demanded the resignations of the sitting board and gave notice that I would act by written consent before the close of business to reconstitute it, and I looked at Stuart Benke in the third row while I said it, and Stuart Benke studied his shoes as though they had betrayed him. In the corridor outside the ballroom, under a chandelier, Bernice caught my sleeve. Her eyes were wet and her voice was not. What do you want done first? Pull the ethics report, I said. The one with 5 signatures on the last page. Every executive whose name is on it, fire every one of them, for cause, today. And Bernice, they receive exactly the courtesy I received. 1 page, 1 morning, a box. That was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By midnight I understood what I had won. We worked in Benke's surrendered office, Palmer and Bernice and me, and a forensic accountant Palmer had on retainer. Going through the files, the injunction now compelled them to open, and at 11:40 the accountant took off his glasses and said, very quietly, that we needed to stop looking at the ethics matter and look at what he had found instead. The Nevada expansion had never been funded. It had been borrowed, $40 million of it, and the collateral was not Nevada. The collateral was us. The Tolleson Distribution Center, the real estate under the 6 strongest Arizona stores, Sunny Slope among them. Leland had pledged the ground under my grandmother's company to build his monument, and when the monument failed, he had hidden the wound inside intercompany accounts and rerouted freight and a drained hardship fund. And then he had done the only thing left, which was to sell the whole company fast enough to pay the debt before the debt introduced itself. And the debt had been sold. Months ago, quietly, at a discount, the original lender had assigned the entire facility to an affiliate of Corvan Capital. Either way, we already own the building. The sale was never the takeover. The debt was the takeover. I had killed the transaction, and Corvan had lost nothing at all, because they held a balloon payment due in November, covenants we were already breathing on, and the deed of trust on the ground under everything. They did not need my vote. They needed a default, and by the accountant's arithmetic, with vendors at 90 days, we would strain to make payroll inside 60. I had taken the keys to a burning building in front of witnesses at the top of my voice. And there was one page more. The ethics report against me had a drafting history, and its template, its actual electronic bones, was an older document, and the accountant turned his screen around, and I read the caption of the 2018 disloyalty findings in the matter of Petra Dressler, ratified by the votes of the Dressler bloc, cast by proxy in my name. I flew to Spokane in the morning. Chapter 9, Winter in July. My sister made me wait in a warehouse, not a lobby. The warehouse itself, a grocery cooperative's distribution floor on the west side of Spokane, forklifts singing past me for 20 minutes while I stood by a rack of canned tomatoes holding my purse like a woman at a bus stop, and I understood that the waiting was the message. This is where I live now. You will stand in it. Her office was glass and plywood above the dock doors. She looked like our father. That was the first blow, and it landed before either of us spoke. Petra at 54, with our father's grey at her temples, and our grandmother's reading glasses pushed up on her head, and 8 years of a life I knew nothing about hung on the walls in photographs, co-op crews, a lake, a dog. You have 30 minutes, she said. I priced it against what your call was worth 8 years ago. Sit down. I sat, and I did the only thing I had come to do. I did not explain. I asked her to tell me, and she did, and I made myself take all of it the way you stand in Whether You Have Earned. She told me what an escorted walkout does to a person who has given a company 20 years. She told me about the severance agreement with the silence built into it, signed because our grandmother was 90, and Petra would not spend Frida's last years dragging the family name through a courtroom to save her own. She told me about the industry, how small it is, how a whisper travels ahead of a resume, the interviews that ended politely in 11 minutes, the year she stocked shelves at night in another company's store under a manager half her age. She told me about the holidays. She did not cry, and I understood that she had done all her crying years ago, in an apartment I had never seen, and that what sat across the desk from me now was what had been built afterward, on purpose, without me. You want to know the worst part, she said. It was not Leland. Leland was just a man stealing. I understood Leland by the second year. It was that my grandmother sent back my letters, and my sister never called, and the two of you did it on his word. He did not even have to work at it, Cora. He told you I was a thief in that gentle voice of his, and my whole family said thank you, and closed the door. Yes, I said, That is what happened. Do not agree with me to manage me. I am not managing you. I signed it, Petra. The words came out level, because I had promised myself they would. The findings against you were ratified by the family block, my shares, my name. I let my votes ride behind his signature for 11 years because reading the paperwork felt like distrusting my husband, and so I did not read it. I did not read the agreement that ruined you, and I did not read the one that could have stopped him. And there is no version of this where I get to say I did not know, because not knowing was a choice I made every year, in comfort. I signed it. I did not read it. That is worse. The forklift sang below us. My sister looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind her face, and then she closed it, the way you close a register drawer. I read the trade press, she said. I know why you are really here. You stood up in a ballroom and took a company with a $40 million balloon on its neck. And now you need an operator whose name a lender will believe. And you looked around, and there is exactly one, and she shares your blood. 8 years and a telephone, Cora. You had 8 years and a telephone, and you came when you needed a chief executive. She stood and opened the office door, and the noise of the floor came up between us. The answer is no, do not write. Tell Bernice I said hello. She was the only one who sent Christmas cards. She did not look at me on my way out. I made it to the rental car before my hands started shaking, and I sat in a parking lot in Spokane where the summer air was soft and green and merciless, and then I drove to the airport and flew home to the war. Phoenix closed in from 3 directions that week. Leland struck first. His attorneys filed an emergency application attacking Section 11, unconscionability, ambiguity, a theory that the clause was an invalid penalty on the constitutional right to seek a divorce, and the judge denied the freeze he wanted. My control held, but the judge also declined to dismiss and set a briefing schedule, and that was all Corvan's lawyers needed. Litigation pending regarding control of the borrower, a cloud on the question of who I even was. The bank felt the cloud before I finished explaining the sunshine. I went to the community bank my grandmother had walked into in 1962, the one that took a chance on a widow, and the chairman received me himself, an unhurried man near 70 who kept a photograph of his father on the credenza, and he heard the whole plan, and he wanted to say yes. I watched him want to. Then he folded his hands. Mrs. Dressler, I will hold this window open as long as I can defend it. But I cannot refinance $40 million against pledged real estate for a company whose control is in litigation, run by an owner the newspapers called a thief last month, with no seasoned grocery operator on the org chart. Bring me an operator lender's trust, or bring me a buyer. I am sorry to say it in the same room where my father said yes to your grandmother. Annalise Court came third, and she came herself, alone, to the porch of my grandmother's house in Sunnyslope, which I understood was meant to show me how thoroughly I had been studied. Her offer was clean, and it was the most dangerous hour of the entire war, because every word of it was rational. Corvan would buy the company now, at a fair price, fully valued, no fire sale, my name on a funded foundation, employment guaranteed for 18 months for every worker, vendors paid current at closing, no litigation, no default, no collapse. You fought brilliantly, and you won a burning building, she said, sitting in Frida's porch chair with her ankles crossed. I am offering to buy it before the fire reaches the people you love. In 90 days, I take it through a default instead, and the guarantees go away. And that outcome is worse for everyone except my fund. I am not your enemy, Mrs. Dressler. I am your deadline. The store on Hatcher Road, I said, in your plan. Does it live? She was too disciplined to lie small. No. Then we are still enemies, I said. Thank you for coming yourself. After she left, I sat on the porch a long time, and then I did the last thing I did that week. The thing I told no one about, not Palmer, not Bernice. I convened the new board by written consent, and put one resolution through it and filed it publicly where corporate records live. The 2018 findings in the matter of Petra Dressler were vacated in their entirety, her record corrected, the severance silence released, and an apology entered into the permanent minutes of the company, naming what was done to her and who benefited from it. No press release, no copy mailed to Spokane, no telephone call. It was not a move in the war, and I refused to let it look like one. It was just what was true, and true things belong on paper, where my family has always trusted things to live. Then the money ran out of road. The plan Yolanda and I had drafted at her kitchen table, sell the dead Nevada leases, sell 2 Scottsdale parcels, refinance the rest, and sell 30% of the company to its own employees through an ownership trust so no fund could ever hold the ground under us again, sat in a folder the bank would not open without an operator, and there was no operator, and on the last Friday of the month, the accountant showed me the cash calendar, and payroll was 9 days out with a hole in it. At 2 in the morning, I was in the Tolleson break room with Yolanda under the fluorescent lights, with 3,000 people's paychecks on a legal pad between us, and I told her the truth I had told no one else. I had the company, I had the plan, I had the people, and I had no way left to save any of it. Yolanda turned her coffee cup a quarter turn, and did not turn it back. The vending machine light flickered twice, like something deciding. Nobody said anything. Chapter 10. The Founders' Table. The bank meeting was set for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, and I walked into it alone, expecting to lose. Palmer had offered to come, and I had said no, because there was no legal argument left to make, only a woman asking an institution to remember 1962. The chairman received me in the same room as before. His credit officers had the folder open, and their faces had the kindness people wear when the answer has already been typed, and I had gotten as far as good morning when the receptionist knocked, apologized, and said there was a Miss Dressler in the lobby who said she was expected. I had not expected anyone. Petra came in wearing a grey suit, and our grandmother's reading glasses pushed up on her head, set a bound plan on the table without looking at me, and shook the chairman's hand. Petra Dressler, she said. 20 years grocery operations, 6 running turnarounds for cooperative grocers in the Northwest. References on the last page. I will be serving as chief executive of this company, assuming the owner approves, and I have restructured her proposal because it was written by people who love this business, and lenders do not fund love, they fund freight. Page 4. Shall we begin? She ran that room for 2 hours. I have watched professionals my whole life, produce brokers and union negotiators, and my grandmother in Full Sail, and I had never seen anything like my sister with a lending committee. She knew our cases per labor hour and theirs. She rebuilt the collateral package out loud. When a credit officer pressed on the litigation cloud, she took him through the clause, the stamp and the statute like a woman giving directions to her own house, and when the chairman finally sat back and said, "Well," and looked at his officers, and his officers looked at their folders and found no further objections living there, my sister capped her pen as if the outcome had never once been in doubt. Only when the bankers had gone did she look at me, and the room got very quiet, and neither of us is a hugger. So what happened instead is that we sat down at the corner of the long table, close, the way you sit at a kitchen table. "A man I trained at the co-op sends me anything filed in grocery," she said. "Corporate records. He flagged a board resolution out of Phoenix. I read those minutes 3 times, Cora. I was looking for the ask, the telephone call that would follow, the pleas that would be hiding in it somewhere." She took the glasses off her head, folded them, an old gesture of our grandmother's, and her voice finally moved. "There was no ask. You cleared my name when you thought I was never coming. And you did not even send it to me. That is the only reason I am here. Do not make me regret it. You will regret it weekly, I said. I am told I count the stores in people. Somebody has to, my sister said. I count them in freight. Grandma kept one of each on purpose. I will not pretend the peace was instant, because it was not, and the honest version is better. Our first full board meeting, 11 days later, Petra took the store renovation plan I loved best and dismantled it in front of everyone. Wrong sequence, wrong capital, sentimentality dressed as strategy, and she was right about 2/3 of it. And I yielded on those, and on the last third, the Tuesday senior discount, restored and protected in the budget forever, I did not yield and did not explain, and my sister studied me across the table and wrote it in without another word. That was the reunion, not the graveside, not tears. Two Dressler women arguing over freight and mercy until the plan held both. The rest fell the way dominoes fall when the first one is heavy enough. The refinance closed in October, anchored by the community bank and by the employee ownership trust, 3,000 workers buying 30% of the company that their hands ran, so that no fund on earth could ever again quietly buy the ground out from under them. Corvan was paid in full at par and went away without a speech, because money never gives speeches, and Annalise Court sent one line through council, "Congratulations," which I chose to believe was sincere, since predators respect little except escape. Leland settled everything in November. His 8% was bought out at fair value, no discount and no cruelty, because I refused to become a woman who did to him what he had done to me, and his transaction bonus came back under the clawback, and the foundation transfers went by referral to the charities division of the Arizona Attorney General, where they belonged, to end however the law decides such things should end. The last time I saw my husband, he was standing alone at the valet stand of the restaurant off Camelback Road, waiting for a car, checking his watch, a handsome man in a beautiful suit whom no one was waiting for. There is one account he will never see. The residence in Sun City is paid through every month, whatever happens to him, by a small trust with a lawyer's name on it, because a tiny white-haired woman on a shaded patio did not sign anything, and because my grandmother taught me that the hardship fund never asks how the hardship happened. On a Saturday in December, before sunrise, I went to Sunnyslope for the first meeting of the employee owners. The break room could not hold everyone, so Manny propped the receiving doors, and they gathered on the dock and in the aisles, cashiers and butchers and drivers holding paper certificates. Rosa Fuentes back to full-time with her benefits and her name tag that said her name. Bernice took minutes, because of course she did. And Manny Otero, 35 years in that building, climbed a step stool by the office and rehung the photograph that Leland's brand consultants had taken down. Frida Dressler, in 1962, arms crossed in front of a failing corner market that every banker but one had refused, and nobody applauded, and everybody stood still a moment, which is better. Afterward, in the cold gold morning, Petra and I drove to the cemetery and stood at our grandmother's grave, and we did not talk much, because we did not need to anymore. She refused my letters, Petra said finally, and kept everyone. She was waiting to be persuaded, I said. She just ran out of time. So she left the persuading to us. My sister nodded and put her hand on the stone the way you touch a shoulder, and we walked back to the car through the early light to go open the stores. Here is what I know now, and I paid full price to know it, so I will say it plainly and only once. Power that stays quiet is not weakness. My grandmother held her claws for 11 years and never spoke of it. I held mine for 26 days that felt like 11 years. Stewardship is not the absence of strength. It is strength waiting for its hour, and when the hour comes, It does not shout. It stands up in the back of the room, and it says, calmly, "No."